Hello and welcome to this DCD Talks, where we will be exploring the benefits of universal inputs. My name is Kat Sullivan, I'm a channel manager here at DCD, and today I'd like to welcome Zach Chauncy, Manager of Product Management for Legrand's Power Access and Control Division, which includes the Server Technology and Raritan brands. Hello Zach, how are you?
Great, Kat. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic. Look, for those who may not know you, can you give us a little bit more of an introduction to yourself, please?
Sure. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I'm a product manager for a specific division of Legrand, being power access and control. That includes server technology and Raritan. So, our core focus is on developing power distribution units for the data center white space. Uh, Really, my focus as a product manager is, solving customer problems through the development of unique rack power solutions. This can include both the release of kind of our generational platforms, so Pro 4X and PX4. You'll hear me repeat that a lot through the discussion today, and that's just our most recent iteration of the PDUs from both Raritan and ServerTech. And then in addition to kind of those generational platforms, we do custom designs, and those designs are specifically tailored to that user's needs. And a lot of the time, designing those customs for those unique needs is more often than not what allows us to innovate, because we're finding through those interactions with our customers what the real problems are. And once we define a new innovation, we typically will integrate those into those generational platform releases. And so usually you'll see we iterate those releases when we have, that big next innovative feature.
And just to take a step back, for those those of our viewers who may not be familiar with Legrand, can you give us a little bit of background to the company?
Yeah, so I mean, Legrand is a global leader in the electronics industry. They do all sorts of things, from lighting, structured wire, and cabling, but specifically, LNCA, so Legrand North and Central America, which is the division I work for, and then the Power Access and Control division, we're focused on the data center white space, specifically at the rack, in distributing power to the critical devices, so your servers and your switch gear.
Mhm. Brilliant. In your introduction, you already mentioned sort of focusing on some of the key challenges that your customers are facing. I wonder if you could just talk us through some of the ones that you're seeing at the moment, especially the challenges relating to adaptability and flexibility in the data center.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kat. And I think there's real value in understanding those common challenges that our data center customers are facing today, because again, that's what's driving our decisions on how we push our product lines forward. So, modern data center and rack power infrastructure requirements are dynamically changing. And that wasn't necessarily the case when I entered the industry 8 years ago. The power requirements were fairly static. There wasn't much variance in the configuration of critical rack infrastructure, which is those servers and network switches again. And really, not much time has passed in the scheme of things since I entered the industry, but there have been drastic changes in the data center. So today's data center is different, and customer deployment requirements are driven by that need for adaptability and flexibility, like you mentioned, but also, an ever scaling power density requirement. All the, growth that we've seen within AI applications or super compute applications are just making those power density requirements grow exponentially year over year. So,
Mm.
as a leader in rack PDU innovation, server technology and Raritan have met, a lot of the requirements from the industry through our existing features, like our high density outlet technology, which, effectively increased outlet density at the rack by 50%, which was huge. Our alternating phase outlets, which simplified the rack power load balancing process for users. Our CX combination outlet, which is a combo of the IEC C13 and C19 that accepts both C14 and C20 plugs, just again, giving the user more options, greater flexibility in that one chassis, rather than in the past, if your configuration of your critical devices, so your servers and your switchgear, changed, you often had to source a different PDU just to get a different configuration of outlets, but that's not the case with the CX outlet. And, really there's been a lot of parity in the industry following the release of those innovative features from ServerTech and Raritan, but we've been focused on what's next, which leads me to the universal input, which you mentioned in the introduction. So, simply put, the universal input feature is a one-size-fits-all PDU infeed that accommodates both single-phase and three-phase power cords in one chassis, which allows the user a ton of adaptability to the dynamically changing power configurations without, again, having to look at an alternate PDU and not having to source an alternate PDU every time your power configuration changes is going to save you a ton of time and a ton of money.
Well, today's conversation is titled "The Benefits of Universal Inputs." So, can you talk us through some of the key benefits that are tackling some of the most important challenges for the industry at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing that I'll mention as a benefit of universal input isn't necessarily the feature itself, but it's the experience that we have and the time that we've had to improve our universal input design. While this might appear to be our first universal input offering that's available broadly to all of our customers, we have a ton of experience in developing universal input products and have been doing so for about 5 years. We were approached by a great customer, a high-end cloud provider with a very unique requirement that we'd not heard really prior. They asked for one PDU that was flexible enough to be integrated into the rack domestically and then shipped globally, with the option to define the power input when that complete rack solution was already on site. And that's not something that we'd encountered before. And what we ended up developing from our perspective was what we consider to be the first universal input PDU. And to date, we've manufactured tens of thousands of that specific design. But, going back to your question, key benefits and differentiators. So the standout improvement that we've made in the past 5 years since we first released that one universal input PDU is our patented smart cord technology. So smart cord technology utilizes an EPROM, which is a form of non-volatile memory. So it's a storage data chip that retains data whether there's power to the device or not. So the EPROM is housed in the universal input cord, which can be detached from the PDU itself and again swapped at any time by the user. And what that smart cord technology does is it allows the PDU to dynamically update the ratings and the thresholds in the graphical user interface based on the specific universal input cord that they install on the PDU. Other universal input products in the industry require you to manually set the ratings and the thresholds every time you install a new cord. And, that can be a lot of time and ultimately money in technician time spent on just simply swapping your power drop. Or, again, going back to my prior comments, having to install a completely different PDU if you're not using something with a universal input feature. In addition to that, our universal input is installed on our 45-degree angled infeed, which effectively reduces the SKUs that a data center manager has to manage by half. In addition to that, it lessens the time that they have to spend on deployment and installation instructions, which can be a huge time expenditure for data center managers that often goes undiscussed and unnoticed. And we, when we're communicating with customers, we're regularly looking for ways to try and help them reduce that overall SKU count that they have to manage. So universal PDU and 45-degree angle infeed do that in a significant way.
And who are the target users or, I guess, applications for a universal input PDU?
So, really any user that's looking for the flexibility of a single PDU that can accommodate a variety of input types. Like the prior user I mentioned, so cloud, hyperscale, or enterprise data centers that are producing large-scale rack solutions. Typically, they'd stock and stage components, upon getting a work order for a new data center. but they'd ultimately wait to assemble, which is what we call rack and stack, until the input power is defined for that specific location. Universal input gives those users the flexibility to pre-assemble the cabinet with the PDU and devices already installed. And so all they do is integrate and then ship that rack globally. And when it lands on site, they can, based off of the power drop provided, install the appropriate universal input cord. And if there's a change at that site over time where the power, requirements change, then they just simply define a new universal input cord type via that same PDU. And when they install it, all their thresholds will be updated within the user interface automatically. Alternatively, we have co-location operators. They can often, bill the end user by not how much power is actually used, but simply by the power cord or the power drop that is provided to them. With Pro4X and PX4 universal inputs, the users have the ability to, adapt. And so if they are looking to save some money and they don't have a high power requirement, they can install a lower rated input cord. If their power density requirements increase, then they can simply swap it out. And so not only, again, are they saving time, but money on hardware and ultimately what they're billed for from the co-location provider.
So you mentioned quite a few different options when we were talking about preparations for this conversation. Can you talk us through what is the range of options for universal input PDUs, and also how does a customer make the right choice for them?
Sure. So the options available today are pretty straightforward. We offer universal input on all of our server technology Pro4X and PX4 PDUs in any flavor of intelligence. So we can have our smart units, which are just remote managed, or you can have switched units, which allow you to cycle power to individual outlets, or we have what's called our POPS options, or per outlet power sensing, which provides metering at each individual outlet. So on any flavor of those available options, you can have a universal input installed. And the capacities that we currently support are up to 22 kW, so 6 branches or breakers on a given PDU. And then we have 11 universal input cord variants that support single phase ratings of 200 to 240 volt, 30 to 60 amps, or 3-phase cords with ratings of 200 to 415 volt and also 30 to 60 amps. But this is just our first pass at the universal input cord offering, so that's something that we will look to offer more options for over time.
I very much look forward to seeing how the options develop and to see what you'll be doing over the near future. But for now, Zach, that is all we have time for, I'm afraid. I do hope that you can join us again soon. And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching, and do tune in again for more DCD Talks. Thank you and goodbye.